Frank and I have been, and by the way, I should introduce my co-conspirator, Frank Rose, leading distinguished writer, journalist, author, written for everyone from the New York Times to Forbes to Wired. He was some of all those great articles that you probably read over the years in Wired. Many of them probably were written by Frank. And most recent book was The Art of Immersion, how digital technologies, how digital is changing storytelling in Madison Avenue and Hollywood. So I commend you all to read it, and we're co-conspirators outside of this piece. But just to set this up, Embracing Analog, was that we thought it would be quite fun, again, we live in a world of increasing digital perfection, and yet as human beings, we're really quite messy. We're really quite not perfect. And that would be somewhat of the topic we're going to talk about. A few credits. We are going to present quite a lot of in-depth research. It's only scratching the surface. We need to credit and give a shout out to JWT Intelligence, who worked with us. Frank and JWT got together initially, had the idea to actually create a body of research around this whole topic, which Frank's going to kick off in a minute. So again, a big thanks to Sonar and JWT Intelligence. Sonar's part of their group. They couldn't be here today, but that's that. And I'm going to, without further ado, hand over to Frank, who's going to sort of kick us off.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Let's see. I've been interested in this question about the relationship between digital and physical for some time. But one of the things that kind of crystallized it for me was last year I was having coffee with a friend in Brooklyn. I know a lot of people in their 30s who tend to be very sort of digitally inclined, and also tend to live in Brooklyn. So we were talking about music, and we were specifically talking about vinyl. And this is somebody who, I mean, we all have a million songs in our pocket, right? But at the same time, we're often moving increasingly into a world in which that's not enough. And what my friend Scott was saying was that he said certain objects have memories. And in 20 years, I want a token that I enjoyed this album in 2012. I don't want to have to say to my son, here's my hard drive. And this is, by the way, somebody who didn't have any kids at that point. So, here we go. And that led me to wonder, is this really a common attitude? And the only way to find out was to do a little research. That's how I came to partner with JWT. So I'm going to sort of give you a little window into what we found. The first thing we asked was, what kind of habits do people have? What do they do online and what do they do offline? And as you can see here, the one thing that just about everybody does online is research products. That's kind of like the gateway drug, it seems, of the internet. There's playing games, paying bills. The thing that people are least likely to do, it turns out, is watch TV shows online. That is, I think that explains a lot about the over-the-top phenomenon and why it's been something that we've been predicting for 5 to 6 years now, and it's still only barely starting to happen. After we got these results, we sort of segmented the population into the kind of degree of digitalness, so to speak. And so we sorted them into 4 groups. And the first is the people who are firmly in the past. As you can see, just about the only thing they do online is research products and play games and pay bills. The sort of typical person in this category would be a male boomer with no college degree and not earning a whole lot of money. as you move up in the digital spectrum, you have people who are dabbling with it. Typically female, also no college degree, also not earning a great deal of money. Then you have people who are on their way to digital. This group skewed female as well, but they also tended to have college education and to earn considerably more money. And finally, we had a small group, it turns out, that we would consider hardcore digital. And typically here, millennial males with a college degree and earning over $80,000 a year. So well over half of what the people who are not very digital are making. But then we wanted to segment it out according to demographics, according to age cohort. And so we took these 4 groups and divided them up according to where they fell on the age spectrum. Not surprisingly, millennials and Gen Xers were much more digitally inclined than boomers and silents. Millennials, by the way, are about, this poll was people 18 plus. Millennials are roughly 18 to 35. Gen Xers about 36 to, I think, 47 or so. Boomers 47 to 48 rather to 60 something, and silence obviously above that. But the interesting thing I think was that even among millennials and Gen Xers, there was a very small percentage of people who we would consider really seriously involved in a digital lifestyle. Next, we asked some questions about attitudes. Having segmented them out according to age and how digital they were, we wanted to ask their attitudes about, about digital things and about physical things. Obviously, as you can see here, people really like digital because it's convenient. You can keep a lot of stuff, it doesn't clutter up your house. It's easier to download than to go to the store, and so forth. But the interesting thing here, I think, is when you ask people about physical things, they like it for an entirely different reason, which is, that it makes them feel rooted, it makes them feel grounded. It feels special somehow. And surprisingly, in many of these questions, especially the one about, it means more if someone gives me a physical book than an ebook, you get more, buy-in, so to speak, from millennials than from most other people. And in every case, there was a very solid majority of people who felt this way.
So what does this mean? Let's just, we clicked a few. What does this really mean? I think our hypothesis is that there's an emotional void in our digital world. I mean, if you think about society and culture, we've obviously, the last 15 years are just a blip in terms of human behavior. And if you take the last 4 years or 5 years and think of the transformative things that have hit us and that we've started embracing and adopting, it's a blip of a blip. So we don't really fully know the societal impact of digital, but at the moment, I think a hypothesis would be that there is an emotional void. We live in an ever more hyper-connected world where convenience, if you think about some of the IQ benefits of digital, their convenience, they're around efficiency, which tilts us towards the IQ side of our being. And thus, I think, leaving an increasing emotional void in the EQ. I just want to take a little survey. So here's just I want to ask a question about music. So I'd like to see a show of hands for everyone who remembers the first album they bought or the first CD they bought. Let's just see what okay, a few shout outs. Anyone remember what was your first? Bon Jovi, great one. You're going to get an album. Which album do you want? Was it an album or a CD? You can have Led Zepp, you can have Blondie, you can have Jimi Hendrix smash hits. You want the Zet? Oh, I know that. Oh, I don't want to depart with it. Anyone else is going to shout out? Do they remember viscerally what they did in the back there? Oh, and do you remember where and when and everything? Yeah. Now, do you want Jimi Hendrix? You take Hendrix.
Good call.
Anyone else remember? Here.
Bobby Sherman.
Whoa! That's fantastic. You've got choice of Blondie or Sly and the Family Stone.
Sly.
Yeah. Last one. Anyone else?
I'd just like to follow up on the AC/DC, although I was in on Dirty Underachieved.
Well, you get Blondie, one of my favorites. Now, I'd like to see a show of hands for people who remember the same kind of emotion for the first time they downloaded a piece of music. So come on, show of hands. What's that? There isn't one hand, I don't think. Oh, is there? Oh, I'm sorry. Please, the one and only. Okay. And I don't have a download, but maybe I'll send you an iTunes. I'll be able to. But I use that really by way of talking about this emotional void that we have. We remember something because it was so physical. We remember that actual activity so viscerally. And yet my daughter, age 15, cannot remember the first downloaded piece of music that she had. She recently bought a record player, and it was fascinating. She bought a record player, so she's been playing vinyl. She's been buying vinyl records as a 15-year-old. My 11-year-old son literally walked up to it, and he couldn't believe. He thought it was a magical instrument. This weekend, he said, "How do I do this, Dad?" So I showed him how he put the album, the vinyl on, and I said, "You have to turn the needle back to you know." And when he put it on, he almost went back when the music came out of it. It was like a magical box. And it was sort of kind of interesting. I may have overkilled it, but Daft Punk, you know, the guys who were really the progenitors of electronic dance music put out an album. We all know, I mean, it was the album of really the summer. And as the New York Times called it, an analog flashback to the era of live musicianship. Random access memories suggest computers, of course, but also memory, as in Memento. So really, the whole album is a comment on the emotional sterility of digital. So I think a good way of kicking this off. We also found in our research, Pleasure in the Imperfect, here's a little anecdote. One of the first albums I ever bought was, funny enough, David Bowie's Pin-Ups. And this was scrap art that we picked up, and how bizarre that this is a scratched piece of vinyl. And the song that's circled is Sorrow. With your long blonde hair and your eyes of blue, the only thing I ever got from you was sorrow. And I just remember playing it time and time again, and the scratches were all part of the imperfection. And the imperfection, the pleasure in the imperfection, music was meant to be atoms. And 2/3 of millennials say that imperfections on physical objects, such as scratches, scuff marks, give them personality. So it's interesting, the phenomenon of tagging your perfect Apple computer, scuffing it up, is part of the behavior. And 50% of boomers say as much. Nostalgia plays a huge component, and we're hardwired for physical and emotional connection. And the more removed, we would argue, and the research is suggesting, the more we're removed from the physical, the more we yearn them, and the more we yearn emotional experiences. And nostalgia is one very strong consequence of this. So the sentimental yearning for things past that somehow felt safe, secure, and maybe metaphors for happier, less complex lives. We live in this world. And we also found that there was a correlation between this world of anxiety and the world of nostalgia, how nostalgia, and we're going to come to some marketeer rules in a minute. And as you can see, well, hopefully you can see from this research, you know, that 72% of British adults and 67% of Americans sometimes feel nostalgic for the things of the past. So like vinyl records, photo albums. Roughly 60% in both countries have a greater appreciation of things that aren't used as much as they used to be, like record players, film cameras, et cetera, et cetera. So even though there's been this rush to obviously obliterating the physical, I think we may see a resurgence back, and we're certainly seeing resurgence in vinyl records, Hallmark in terms of gift carding. You'd have thought they were out of business, but they're not. They're having some of the most stellar years because they've embraced digital, but they've also reinvented the physical as well. And a quest for originality, adopting items that people no longer have a true need for, wristwatches, stationery. You know, I sit here with a Nike Fuel Band, I've got my phone, and yet, you know, I still wear my trusted watch. You know, the luxury end of the watch market is going through a boom. It may be the only piece of male jewelry that is acceptable, but certainly we're seeing a boom there. And again, the quest for originality, I'd be interested in buying now obsolete items like record players and typewriters as collector's items. Again, millennials, it's counterintuitive. You think maybe that's going to be the boomers and the silents are going to embrace this. But what we see time and time again throughout this research is the group that's indexing highest on questions like that is Etsy, and that's all about old for new. And what we're seeing in the research is 57% of millennials have done this themselves. So they're actually embracing flea markets. They're actually doing crazy things like using bowler hats as light shades. Very interesting. And even still, 44% of Gen Xers say as much. So how is this trend playing out? I'm going to hand off to my trusted partner here.
Thanks, Paul. I think there are some very interesting implications here for you know, any number of different types of marketers. The first thing I wanted to talk about was the revival of vinyl. I mean, that's maybe the most obvious example here. Now, it's true that vinyl is still only a very small part of music sales, but it's been going up, you know, in large percentages year over year, while CD sales have continued to crash, and digital sales, while obviously much larger proportion, are growing considerably less. Another interesting phenomenon here is, if you look up at the top, you see the Beatles' Abbey Road. And it used to be, until 2012, that was the most popular vinyl record around. That's no longer the case. The case now is the most popular records for sale are the XX in the UK and Jack White in the US, which I think gives you an idea of who's buying these things. South by Southwest, you know, it's, I think, really interesting that as much as we, you know, like to talk about being able to telecommute, we all come together in places like this. And nowhere do we do it more than at South by Southwest. The numbers are just staggering. I think 4 years ago, there was something like 9,000 people who came to South by Southwest Interactive. It was 13,000 a year or so after that. This past year, I believe it was 36,000, and it's just like a staggering number. And then there's the whole idea of print, and I think that people are having a new appreciation for it. There was this article in that ran on Mashable last winter, I think. It was headlined, "Why Printed Books Will Never Die." And the last I checked, which was actually this morning, it had gotten almost 10,000 shares, views rather, on the site. And you see here what the author said. He also had some very interesting quotes. There was a webmaster for a digital publisher whom he quoted as saying, "There are books that I need bound and sitting on my shelf. I need a copy of Fahrenheit 451. That book is important to me." So what's important to you is what you want in physical form.
So what can we learn? You know, this hopefully has been an interesting dissertation, a little bit counter programming. But we think there are actually lessons to be learned if you're a marketeer or if you're a media group or if you're an agency, as we sort of, at this lightning pace towards the digitization of everything. Clearly it's here to stay, so I hope you accept that what we've done is try to not dismiss digital. We're all very digitally native, but I think it's more about how do you leverage aspects of physical, and certainly one of the rules we think is amplify the physical. Our immersion in the digital world makes us keenly aware of what's unique about physical objects. If we don't have a real, use for them, that can only makes them more appealing in some ways. They become statements. There's a social science around uniqueness theory, which you should certainly delve into if you're a marketeer or a strategist. People have an innate need to differentiate themselves from others. It's just part of our human DNA. But at the same time, we also have this sort of dichotomy of also wanting to fit in. So Frank coined this, so we want to be moderately unique. And one way is to buy things, especially things that others cannot buy. And here's an example. Welcome to the world of the $800 LP, the Pet Shop Boys last year. And this is one of many, many examples of limited edition, special edition, physical objects that become collector's items, unique. Tashkent is one of my favorite publishers. Not only do they publish books in limited editions, but they publish them in oversize, often as not. They've just done a Sebastian Salgado, the top end it's $10,000, and even for a regular edition it's $3,000, and you get it, in a beautiful pack. And they're actually one of the most successful publishers around today. So we learn a lesson from that.
Thanks, Paul. So second. You need to, I think, you need to think about how to bridge these two. We're rapidly moving into a world where not everything is purely physical and not everything is purely digital. I think this is a really good example. This is, Moleskine is a company that has for years made its name by emphasizing the tactile, the almost fetishistic qualities of physical objects. And yet they've partnered with Evernote to create an app where you can photograph, if you have a special Moleskine notebook, you can photograph it, upload it to Evernote, and it becomes a digital file. You can search it, you can save it, you can share it, you can do all of these things. You move from physical to digital and vice versa.
The third is fill the emotional void, and certainly we were at a South by Southwest, a partner, senior partner, Kleiner Perkins, came up and we were having a discussion with her, and I asked her the question. She leads all their seed investments. I said, what's the single biggest trend that you're looking at in terms of investments? And I hope I'm not taking her out of context, but she said, actually we're looking at physical digital. That's an area that we've been very, very interested in. And in particular, areas where there is an emotional connection. And it was so funny when we talked about, if you think about the transportation, the utility of transportation, and what Uber has done to bring not just that wonderful efficiency, but actually we really like our drivers now. I mean, I don't know whether it's you, but I mean, I feel guilty if I don't give them a 5-star, first and foremost. But actually, generally speaking, versus the old livery drivers where you wanted to give them -5 because of the poor service. So there is an emotional connection, and Frank's got a lovely little story on that.
So last October, last year, I was in New York where I live, Hurricane Sandy, kind of a mess. And I live in the East Village. Everything south of 42nd Street was dark. There were no lights. There was no electricity. There was no nothing. After a couple of days, I took my laptop uptown and quickly realized that the available electricity was in great demand. So rather than sit in line, I just hopped a cab, which I happened to see, and went over to Brooklyn to a friend's house. My wife was not quite ready at that point, so I couldn't pick her up. We had to find somebody to take care of the cats. We live in a 15th floor apartment with no elevator service. So after a day, she did that, and I called a car for her on Uber. And you know, to my mind, the greatest, I mean, I'm kind of a map freak anyway, but the greatest thing about Uber is the little cars on the map and how you can watch them move around. And for me, being able to watch, you know, this is a time when traffic was supposed to be at a standstill, being able to watch her progress, you know, on my iPhone was a very emotional moment.
Is this mine? Or you've got
let's see, I think okay, I think that's yours.
So I think we should embrace nostalgia, leverage nostalgia. We all remember Oreo's twist, lick, dunk, and despite my accent, I think that's been obviously a behavior, a nostalgic behavior. And it's very interesting how Mondelez and Oreos have been cited as one of the digitally native, one of the sort of great case study examples of how you can take a storied brand that has all this heritage and nostalgia and actually embrace it and move it into the digital age. And certainly, I think the example of Twist, Lick, Dunk is a great example. So don't be fearful of nostalgia. It doesn't just work for the boomers. Every piece of research suggests that actually these behaviors can be embraced and adopted and applied to the millennials and the new generations coming through.
So we seem to have accidentally skipped number 4. Believe me, there was a number 4. If you come to me later, I'll tell you about it.
Well, I can quickly. I'll riff on it. It was basically it was welcome imperfection. So we started the dissertation about how messy our lives are in real life, and how digital is very, very perfect. So embracing imperfection is something that we can do. And there's a great example of Elizabeth Weil. So some of us went over to Andreessen Horowitz. She's actually a partner at Andreessen Horowitz. She's an absolute digital maven in Silicon Valley. Interestingly, about 4 or 5 years ago, she came across a letterpress, an old letterpress, and she bought it for $2,500. She installed it in her garage, and basically she has incubated a separate business which is printing slightly imperfect business cards, greeting cards. So she actually has a thriving business out of her garage. And who would have thought that Andreessen Horowitz, you know, investors in Facebook, Google, etc., one of the partners is embrace the imperfect. So it's a sort of wonderful little anecdote we had for you about that.
So, and then finally, don't forget the candlelight. Now, we tend to think of manufacturers of physical goods, especially physical media, as kind of like blacksmiths in 1910. But that's not the case at all, I don't think. I think they're much more like candle makers in the 1870s. Thomas Edison brought in electricity, and suddenly you had electric lights, and it was infinitely more efficient. They were brighter, they were cheaper, they didn't make a mess. So electricity was a major boon. But candles never stopped. You know, we still use candles today. We just use them for something very different. We use them for their romantic qualities, and they give us something that electric light doesn't. And I think that's what we have to remember, especially people who do manufacture or market physical goods. They have to be different now. It's no longer about making them cheap. It's about making them, if anything, expensive. It's about creating a sensory experience, a sensual experience, and that's something that's not going to go away.
So thank you very much. Thanks.